So we live in a very tolerant time, and the impression is always that we have to be accepting, that we have to receive others where they are, and I think there's something very good to that, and especially in recent times in the church we've had very much that impression, kind of anything goes, and so I think it's surprising, but also somewhat refreshing to read the recent note that comes from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, which was previously known as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or if you go further back, the Holy Office, which was responsible for the Inquisition, and that just a few months ago, Pope Francis named Archbishop Fernandez, since then Cardinal Fernandez, to be at the head of this dicastery. And what are they speaking about? They're speaking about Freemasonry. And I think that kind of the public image, or what a lot of us might think of when we hear about Freemasonry, is something like the Shriners, or like the Elks Lodge, where we see a group of men who are doing good things, that are going out and doing service projects. And sometimes it might come up in Catholic circles and Catholic conversation, the fact that Catholics are not allowed to be Freemasons. And this can be very surprising, because it can seem a little bit curious, because we have a positive image of this organization. So why would the church prohibit us from being Freemasons? Well, first let's look a little bit at this document, this note from the dicastery, because I think it'll shed some light on this. What has happened? So apparently in the Philippines, there's been a rise of Freemasonry, and a lot of people, might have that same kind of popular opinion that a lot of us might have as well. That Freemasonry is simply a group that does good, that's existed for a long time. They have their own traditions, their own little mini rituals, but really not anything bad, and actually something that serves a lot of people. And so then there's been a confusion among a lot of the Catholics. And so the bishops were discussing this, and apparently they came up with a document that tried to find a third way, neither totally condemning anybody who was to join the Freemasons, but also not stepping away from the church doctrine and discipline of the last several hundred years, which prohibits this. And apparently one of the bishops, Bishop Cortes, was not satisfied with the document, and so he kind of kicked it up to Rome. He says, "Well, what do you think about this?" And the note that comes out is very clear. Membership in Freemasonry is very significant in the Philippines, and involves not only those who are formally enrolled in Masonic lodges, but more generally a large number of sympathizers and associates who are personally convinced that there's no opposition between membership in the Catholic Church and Masonic lodges. And so, this is interesting. There is a declaration of the problem. And so there's a two-pronged approach that the dicastery is suggesting to the Philippine bishops in order to counteract this rise of Masonry. So first, on the doctrinal level, it should be remembered that active membership in Freemasonry by a member of the faithful is forbidden because of the irreconcilability between Catholic doctrine and Freemasonry. So this is just a restating of a host of documents from the past that prohibit Catholics from being Freemasons. And then the second part of the approach, on the pastoral level, the dicastery proposes that the Philippine bishops conduct catechesis accessible to the people and in all parishes regarding the reasons for the irreconcilability between the Catholic faith and Freemasonry. So, very clear document. Personally, a little pleasantly surprised to see this much clarity there. And now I think we have to dive into the why a little bit, because I think it can be a little bit shocking. And, generally speaking, we don't like prohibitions, when we're kids and there's the fence. We're always trying to get as close to the fence or get over the fence. Reminds me playing wiffle ball with my brother growing up. Well, often the ball would go over the fence, and so you'd kind of check to see if the neighbors were watching, then run across and get the wiffle ball. And that's kind of the same attitude that we tend to have all throughout our lives, always trying to push the limits, always trying to feel like the rules might apply to others, but not to ourselves. And so I think, the first thing that's interesting is that the Filipino bishops, apparently they were looking for a third way, to not come down so harshly, but also trying to respect the tradition of the church. And it's interesting because it goes to the Vatican, and the Vatican basically says no way. As the Cardinal Fernandez, representing the congregate or the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, in very clear terms, says that there's no way that a Catholic can be a Freemason. And so, what is the current legislation regarding this? First I want to go to what is currently stated, and then we can give a little bit the historical context. So in 1983, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith put out a statement saying that belonging to the Freemasons was considered for Catholics to be grave sin and a reason to not be admitted to communion. And why was this statement brought out in 1983? Well, because Code of Canon Law, which is the body of law that governs the church, there are two recent manifestations of this that we have to take into account. And so the 1917 Code of Canon Law, which it was a huge effort to try to get all of the laws of the church that come out in so many different ways into one place. And so that was the 1917 Code. But then part of the renewal of the church coming with the Second Vatican Council, there was also a desire to renew the Code of Canon Law. And so we have the Code of Canon Law coming out of Vatican II, being promulgated by Pope John Paul II. And we refer to this oftentimes as the 1983 Code of Canon Law, which is when it is promulgated, when it comes into effect. And so when this new Code of Canon Law comes in, the technical legal term is that it abrogates the 1917 Code of Canon Law. So the prohibitions that are in the 1917 Code of Canon Law no longer apply unless they're reiterated in the 1983 Code of Canon Law. And so one of the things that was not there was this list of prohibited societies, including Freemasonry. And so very quickly, the church sees the need to prohibit Freemasonry. And so there's this special note from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, and in order to make it very clear. And it's, grave sin and no communion. Now, where does this, there's actually a pretty colorful history of Freemasons and Catholics, basically since the inception of the Freemasons. So they come to be in 1717, 18th century. So we have, a lot of free thinking rising up in Europe, very secular thinking. I think you have to look at a deist ideology. And so the deist ideology is basically the idea of the great watchmaker. God is a great watchmaker. So there's a God, there is a supreme being, but we don't really know him too well. And he kind of sets the universe in action with the law, the physical laws, but then that's pretty much it. And then he's pretty much detached. And that's one of the main things behind Freemasonry. And what's the problem? And a lot of times you might think, oh, okay, but they believe in God. That's a good thing, right? But is it the same God? And is it the same concept that we have of God? And really the kind of the universal judgment of the theologians and pastors over the last 4 centuries has been that no, it's not the same God. It's a very different way of looking at God, and really a reductionist way of looking at God. And so all throughout these last centuries, there's been continuous condemnations of Freemasonry and a prohibition for Catholics to belong to Freemasonry. And part of it because, this deist ideology, but also teaching a new philosophy or a new way of looking at the world that doesn't allow for a Catholic worldview. Then at times, I think there have been groups or expressions of Freemasonry where there's very much a declared purpose of destroying the church. The church being seen as the guardian of an old order, and so something to be destroyed. So I think that obviously adds to the tension. But generally speaking, we can just look at this this idea of religion as being, kind of a common religion. Um, the Freemasons typically say that what they have is not a religion, but that they kind of hold the tenets that all the religions would hold. So it's almost a lowest common denominator form of religion, which they seem to present as being something very non-threatening. But I think that, when we accept that instead of, a personal relationship with Christ, which is what we're all called to, well, then we really are losing a lot. So I want to bring this up. I think it's interesting that the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith has made this declaration really very clear, and I think that, a lot of times we can see that some Catholic responses to Freemasonry may seem a little extreme, and so that might, kind of have some people shy away from it or feel it is a little bit exaggerated. But I think that there are some very real reasons for this. And the biggest thing is that there's a huge difference between a non-personal God and a personal God. There's a very huge difference between, just having a common set of core beliefs that all of humanity can accept and call that kind of, basic religiosity. And then on the other hand, having a God who reveals himself and founds a church in order to save us. So it is something very different. So the stakes here are a lot higher than what some people might be willing to accept or to admit. So that's the main thing here. Um, this is obviously something that comes from the Pope as well. Cardinal Fernandez, meets with the Holy Father, and this is something that he saw with him, and then he puts out. And so I think that it's just a good reminder for all of us to value our faith and make sure that everything that we're doing helps us to fall more deeply in love with Christ and not allow ourselves to be pulled away from him. God bless.